Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm redrawing my first ever OC that I created when I was 14. Recently, I was doing a big cleanup of my room. I was organizing things and getting rid of stuff. And while I was cleaning, I came across this folder that I keep some old art in. And when cleaning my room, I tend to get distracted and look through old boxes and stuff. When I looked through it, I noticed I had quite a few drawings of this same character. I don't remember much about her. I only remember that I really enjoyed drawing her. I don't think I gave her a name, so I don't know if I can call her an OC, but it does seem like she had some kind of story or something. So I thought it'd be fun to redraw this abandoned OC. I've decided I'm going to redraw this picture. I actually remember working on it and being really proud of it at the time. I think I remember this one because I remember my aunt praising me on it and she thought the character was cute, so I felt really proud. But looking back, it definitely has some technical issues, like her head is really big, her hair doesn't make much sense, and her hand is facing the wrong way. Anyways, let's start redrawing this character. I'm actually going to mostly work on this drawing traditionally. However, I'm doing my sketch digitally just because I like how easy it is to fix and refine things when working digitally. Making things look exactly how I want them is always a bit trickier to do when working on paper, because if I want to fix something, I have to completely redraw it. Compared to digitally, I can just select it and move it around and stuff, so it's a lot easier. So I'm drawing this character in a very similar position as the original. I did decide to turn her body to more of a 3/4 view, just because I thought it'd make the composition a little bit more interesting. I think the trickiest part was drawing the hand that is holding the flower. I'm making sure to have it facing the correct direction this time. The flower she is holding is a peony. I decided to have her hold a peony because that's the flower my hand reference was holding. I'm like, why find another flower reference when I have one right here and the hand is already holding that flower? Plus the peony was pink, so it fit in with the color scheme really well. When I first started drawing this character, she looked a little older. But then when I was thinking about it, this character seemed like she was fairly young, so I aged her down a bit. I changed the proportions, made her eyes bigger, and made her head bigger. I actually make the head a bit smaller later because I made it a little bit too big. So I think I accidentally gave this character a name. So like I mentioned, she is holding a peony, and when I saved this file to my computer, I named the file Peony because I didn't know what else to name it. Well, now I just think of this character as Peony, so I think that's her name now. It sounds cute, and I think it fits her look and kind of her personality, it seems. So yeah, her name is now Peony. Also, after naming her, I was reading a webtoon, and the main character's name is Peony, so I think that's why I liked the name. I subconsciously liked the name because of the webtoon, but I forgot that character had that name in that webtoon. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Oh, also the original picture had the left hand behind the back, but I decided to instead have Peony hold a bag filled with flowers. That way her left hand has something to do, and it kind of suggests that she is out in a field picking flowers. So now that my sketch is finished, I will print it out and start working on it traditionally. So I'm actually going to be using some new art supplies that Parkoo sent to me. Also, Parkoo is sponsoring this video, but all thoughts and opinions are my own. So the first thing they sent are their watercolor brush pens. In this set, you get 24 colors plus a water brush pen, and they refer to it as a blender. You can fill this with water and squeeze the barrel to make water come out of the tip. These pens are water-based, acid-free, and non-toxic. The second thing they sent is this 60 set of dual tip brush pens. The pens have a brush tip and a fine tip. The fine tip is super duper tiny. I can definitely use these for line art. These are also water-based, acid-free, and non-toxic. So before working on my picture, I wanted to test these out a bit and get a feel for how they work. So first I wanted to test them out in my sketchbook, because that is what I often draw in. The paper in my sketchbook is marker paper, so it can't handle a ton of water like watercolor paper can. However, these do still work nicely on this marker paper. Because these are water-based, I can use water to blend them out and mix colors, which is very fun. I do want to mention that the brush pens seem to be more water soluble than the dual tip pens. The dual tip pens don't move around as much when I add water to them. They do kind of move and slightly blend out, but not nearly as much as the brush pens. However, I find that the dual tip pens do go down a bit smoother and create a more even coat than the brush pens. The brush pens have more of a texture to them, whereas the dual tip pens are a lot smoother. The brush tip on the dual tip pens feels a little bit more sturdy and a little bit closer to a Copic marker, whereas the tips on the brush pens feel very brushy, if that makes sense. So after testing the pens on my marker paper, I wanted to see how they work on my Canson watercolor paper. Because I plan to use a lot of water for my illustration, I'm going to use watercolor paper for it. The pens did work nicely on the Canson watercolor paper. They blended out well. However, when I would go over the colors with water, I would get this weird texture that I didn't really like. It would get kind of speckly and kind of bumpy looking. This didn't happen on my marker paper, so I assumed this texture was from the paper and not the pens. So I tried to find some other watercolor paper to see if I could get a better result. So I grabbed my Arteza watercolor sketchbook, and it was really weird. When I would put the pens on the paper and try to blend them out, they wouldn't move at all. I can get a little bit of color from them, but they were stuck in place. It's crazy how much the paper can change how these pens behave. But that is the case for pretty much all water-based products. The paper plays a big part in how the supplies behave. So yeah, the Arteza sketchbook did not work. So lastly, I tried my Etcher watercolor sketchbook. This paper is hot pressed, so it is very smooth in texture. It's a lot smoother than cold pressed paper. And oh my goodness, I love these pens on this paper. They blend out so much and it looks super smooth and pretty. I definitely found the paper I want to use these pens with. They don't get the weird texture like on my Canson mixed media paper, and they move around really nicely compared to the Arteza paper. So now that I know what paper I want to use, I cut a piece of paper out of the Etcher sketchbook and used my light pad to transfer my sketch to the paper. To transfer my sketch, I am using a Tuscan Red erasable color pencil. It is basically a deep reddish brown. I often like to use warm browns for line art when I want a warmer feeling to the picture. It also feels lighter and less harsh than a black. So after transferring my sketch, we now have it on the watercolor paper. Now I can start coloring. I decided to start with coloring the dress because I thought that if I messed up in this area, it wouldn't matter too much. I'm always a bit nervous when I start coloring a piece, so I try to start with the areas that aren't too important. Then once I feel less nervous and I'm kind of warmed up, I'll move on to more important areas. So her dress is teal and pink. Even back when I was 14, I liked the combination of teal and pink. So for the teal portion, I apply the pen where the shadow should kind of be, and then blend out the pen using the water brush pen. I was hoping that when I added the water to the teal, it would become quite a bit lighter, like something similar to the original, but it stayed a bit darker and more saturated than I was expecting. I wasn't totally sure how I felt about the darker color since I wanted a lighter color, but I feel like the color being darker helped me not be so timid with the colors. When working traditionally, I tend to keep things kind of light and pastel because I'm too chicken to darken things up. But in this case, since it started kind of dark, it made me be bolder with my color choices, so I guess it was kind of a happy accident. Next was her pink skirt, and this part was so much fun. Once again, I am applying the pen where I think the shadows would be, and then blend them out to the lighter areas. The reason why I apply the pen around where the shadow should be is because if the pen doesn't totally blend out, it is okay, because that's where I want a shadow to be anyways. If I were to apply the pen, say, in the middle of the skirt and then try to blend it out, I may end up with a random dark patch in the middle of the skirt, and I wouldn't want that. So yeah, apply the pens where the shadow should be and you should get a good result. Next is the skin. I do have a lot of colors to choose from, but I didn't have the kind of skin tone I was looking for, so I'm going to mix my own. I grabbed my kind of dirty paint palette and drew on the paint palette with different colors that I wanted to mix. I then used the water brush pen to add water and mix the colors together. This is always my favorite part about working with watercolor mediums, is that if you don't have the color, you can just mix your own. After mixing the skin tone, I started applying it to my picture. So this character that is now named Peony is one of my many abandoned characters. When I was young, I would often like to think of story ideas. Back then, basically anything would become a story idea. If I thought of a concept that seemed slightly interesting, I would spend a good amount of time thinking about it. However, my drawing skills weren't where I wanted them to be, so this often resulted in me not developing the ideas at all. Plus, I would often get stuck since I was very new to creating stories. It seems like I may have made a little bit of a story for Peony, but honestly, I don't remember any of it, or if I did make her a story. The drawing of her in the train and the boy holding her hands seems to be conveying some sort of story, or maybe I just wanted to draw a girl leaving on a train. I don't completely understand what my 14-year-old self was doing. If I were to make a little story for her now, I think maybe her story would be that Peony and her dad are moving to a small village where Peony's grandma lives. So that's how we get the scene of her leaving on the train. Maybe she has to leave her childhood friend and she's very sad that she has to leave him. When she first starts living in the village, she's very sad at first and it takes her a while to get used to living there. But she finds a place that she likes to escape to, and it's the hills that surround the village. On the hills, there are tons of wildflowers everywhere, and she likes to go there and look at all the pretty flowers. Eventually, she starts to like living in the village, and while living there, she meets many new people and has many new experiences. So yeah, that's what I imagine her life would be like. So now I'm working on her hair. Peony has blonde hair. A lot of times I try to avoid using super bright yellows for blonde hair, but the original had really yellow hair, so I decided to just go with it. Plus a lot of the markers I had were really yellow. So for coloring most of the hair, I used the yellow brush pen and the water brush pen to blend out the yellow. After I applied all of the yellow, I added shading with the dual tip brush pens. They had a little bit more of a marigold hue to them, so I thought they would be nice for shading the hair. It's been a very long time since I worked with watercolor-like mediums, so I had a lot of fun working on this picture. The Parkoo pens were a lot of fun to use. It's like I was using watercolors that are a bit more controlled. Watercolors can be a bit unpredictable and hard to control at times, but these pens were pretty easy to control, and by mixing them with the water brush pen, I can get a really nice watercolor look. Also, I love how bright the colors are. They are very saturated and super bright. They're a lot of fun. Last up is the finishing touches. I decided to tighten up the line art a little bit in some areas. I wanted the face to stand out a bit more, so I darkened the line art around it by using the fine tip of the brown dual tip pen. Then I mixed up a blue in my paint palette to use for the sky. I wanted it to be very light and pastel, so that's why I mixed up the paint instead of applying the marker straight onto the paper. I made a gradient that gets lighter as I move up the paper. I did this by adding more and more water to the paint as I would go up the paper. And last but not least, we have the flower petals flowing in the wind. To draw the flower petals, I used the fine nib of the dual tip pen. I was trying my best to make the petals look sporadic and random. This can be tricky to do at times. Like, you want them to look pretty and flow in a pleasing way, but you also want them to look random. It takes a lot more thought than you would think. So now let's see the finished results. I had a lot of fun redrawing this piece and revisiting an old character. It's always fun looking back and seeing how my art has changed. Thank you so much to Parkoo for sending me these supplies. I really enjoyed testing them out and using them. Thank you so much to my patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!